Now, I think this is the only point in this training where I'm going to give a shout out to a book, all right? Because this concept, even though I was using it prior to reading this book, I didn't really have a good way to verbalize what I was doing. And this book really helped to, get to ground me in what this concept is and to really refine it. So the book is called Flip the Script. And this concept I'm going to talk to you about right now is something that in this book he calls a flash roll. So if you want to look it up, Flip the Script. And the concept is called a flash roll. Now, I don't call it a flash roll, but I just wanted to give that shout out. So if you want to take a look at that book, go ahead. So when you get down to number 4 here in the document we have on closing cash discounting deals, you'll notice it talks about establishing expertise. Okay, you need to establish your expertise here. So how do we establish our expertise? This is so interesting. And it was funny when I actually listened to that book on audio that I just mentioned. And when I heard this concept of the flash roll, I'm like, wow, I have been doing that for years, and I never could understand it, why it works so well, and I've never been able to verbalize it or train people on it because it always seemed like such a weird, counterintuitive thing. But the idea is, when I go to see my attorney, I expect my attorney to say some things I don't understand. You know what I mean? If my attorney is saying something that I just totally understand it, then I'm like, why am I going to see my attorney? If I'm smart enough to understand all this, then what am I paying him for? When you go to a doctor, you expect the doctor to say some things, maybe pronounce some words that you couldn't pronounce. You know what I mean? Maybe talk about some medicine or some side effects or some anatomy of your body, something that you're like, I don't understand what they're talking about, but they sure are smart. In the same way as credit card processing salespeople, we can establish our expertise. So I'll give you a quick flash roll and I'll break down some of the key concepts for you, but this is one that I like to use. So we're at a point in the pitch where they say, I really didn't get a chance to look at it much. What is it? How does it work? Or something like that. So now I'm going to establish my expertise. Great question. First of all, I'm sure you're aware that the cost of payment processing has been going up steadily for the last 10 years. In fact, the interchange fees charged by the big banks went up 10% just last year. And as a result, that Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Act, which passed a few years ago, that included a section called the Durbin Amendment. And that amendment gave business owners the ability to incentivize their customers to pay with cash. Now, there's a lot of compliance rules and regulations around these programs, but we work specifically with auto repair shops to implement them. So basically, being free to pass the cost of processing back to the consumer who's choosing to use the card without any impact on your revenue, that'd be a big win for your business, right? So let's break this down because there's a lot to unpack. First of all, we have the flash roll, which is that first part. And this is one part of a script where you actually are going to want to memorize it, like word for word, because you want to be able to say it confidently and verbatim with the right voice inflection, because this is the moment when you are an expert. If you get this right and you land in their mind as an expert, they're much, much more likely to move forward with you. If you get it wrong and kind of stumble over it and sound like you don't know what you're talking about, well, that's going to defeat the whole purpose and you might lose the sale. So you really want to make sure whatever you're going to talk about, you got it nailed down. Now, again, it doesn't have to be this specific information, but this is a good one to start with, okay? So the Durbin Amendment really is something from the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Act. If you ever want to look it up, you could look up cash discounting Durbin Amendment and you would see some information about it there. But what we're doing is we're going to talk pretty quickly at the beginning. And we're going to do some assumptive things. There's just so much going on here. I'm like literally having a hard time unpacking it all in one video. So first of all, I say, I'm sure you're aware that the cost of payment processing has been going up steadily for the last 10 years. Now that statement is an important sales psychology statement. I'm sure you're aware means you're insinuating that this is obvious information. They actually might not know this information, but you're insinuating that it's obvious and everybody else knows it. So, what happens is they are going to buy into it and be like, oh yeah, of course, because you're presenting it that way, right? So now they're kind of admitting that, yeah, the cost keeps going up. Now we're going to get technical. In fact, the interchange fees charged by the big banks went up over 10% just last year, right? So now again, it's like we're driving this point home and we're using a word, interchange fees, that they probably have heard of, but it's a little bit technical. So they're like, okay, I'm not sure I fully understand. Now we're going to go really deep, As a result of these increases, the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Act, which, passed a few years ago, that actually included a section called the Durbin Amendment. And that amendment gave business owners the ability to incentivize their customers to pay with cash. So now I'm really getting more technical, but I'm also talking about stuff they're like, okay, incentivized to pay with cash. They kind of get it. It's one of these things where it's like they generally understand what I'm saying, but there's some technical terms here they're not totally sure of, but I seem very confident with the information. Then I'm going to go and I'm going to make it seem like this is something where they really do need help from an expert. There are a lot of compliance rules and regulations around these programs. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's this whole unknown thing that I'm not even going to get into because I'm the expert and they would never understand, but it's something that's really important, you know? Then I say, but we work specifically with, and then whatever the business type here I'm using, auto repair shops to implement them. So it's like, we specialize in working with you to leverage this complicated thing to save you money. And again, we're explaining it, but we're kind of explaining it in a way that positions us as the expert that they need to implement it. Okay? Now, once all that's done, now what we're going to do is we're going to take all of this expert information and we're now going to summarize it down into a statement that is very, very simple. Now we want to go simple. We want to slow down. We want to go very simple. And we kind of want to say, based on all of that, here's how this applies to you. So basically, so I start with basically. That means like, let me rephrase everything I just said. You know, basically, being free to pass the cost of processing back to the consumer, who's actually the one choosing to use the card, without having any negative impact on your revenue, that would be a really big win for your business, right? So you kind of see where we're going with that. Now we're like, okay, because of all that, here, let's bring it down to the bottom shelf, right? So it's like, you know, we're just explaining it in this one thing at the bottom of just basically. And now by getting them to agree that, yeah, that would be a big win for my business, you've now established yourself as the expert. And that is incredibly crucial and important because there are going to be objections down the way. And if they trust you as an expert and you say, well, yeah, let me tell you what we can do about that, then they're going to believe you. If they don't think you're an expert, then they're not. So you really need to use this flash roll, we'll call it here since that's what it is in the book. You really need to use this little section as opportunity to position yourself as an expert.